They mocked him for looking weird, but they forgot. Don't judge a book by its cover. What would you do if people laughed in your face just because of how you look, but later gave you a standing ovation for what you could do? We live in a world where appearance often speaks louder than the heart, where people mock before they ask, and where true heroes go unnoticed, until it's too late to ignore them. This is the story of Elias, a young man who was humiliated day after day, judged for being different, for having a face many cruelly called weird. But what no one knew is that Elias was hiding a secret, a talent that would change his life and everyone else's. Get ready for a story of bullying, silent revenge, and poetic justice. Because when the truth finally comes out, no one walks away unchanged. Elias didn't look like the other boys at school. His eyes were too big, his jaw slightly crooked from a facial paralysis at birth, and his walk was awkward, like he was always trying to balance on ground that only he saw shaking. On the first day of school, when he walked into the classroom with his worn-out backpack and oversized clothes, there was a brief moment of silence, followed by snickering. "Look, the alien's here!" Someone whispered loud enough for the whole class to hear. Laughter erupted. Elias kept his head down and made his way to the back of the room, wishing he could disappear. It wasn't just how he looked. Elias was quiet. He never raised his hand, ate lunch alone, and avoided eye contact like it might burn him. But behind that silence was a storm. He noticed everything. Every whisper, every mocking look, every cruel joke. And while they ridiculed him, Elias was watching, absorbing the world with an intelligence and depth no one could see. That didn't stop him from being the perfect target, especially for Marcos, the golden boy of the school, handsome, arrogant, and always surrounded by his crew of loyal followers. For Marcos, mocking Elias was a sport, a way to keep his throne, and no one dared to challenge him. The cruelest part, Elias had grown used to it. Like someone living with chronic pain, he had learned to smile through it, just so they wouldn't see him break. But what none of them knew was that behind that weird face, something extraordinary was waiting to be revealed. Something that would flip their world upside down. Every morning was a battle for Elias, not against others. That would have been easier. His real battle was against himself, against the voice inside his head that whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe you are just a freak." At school, the bullying didn't slow down. If anything, it got more creative. One day, someone left a mirror on his desk with the words, "Fix this," written across it in red marker. Another day, he found a banana with googly eyes taped to his locker. Marcos and his gang laughed from a distance, pretending they had nothing to do with it. But everyone knew, teachers, they saw but turned away. Maybe they thought Elias was too strange, too quiet to be worth defending. Maybe they thought he didn't care, but he did. He just didn't know how to show it. In the cafeteria, tables were packed, except for one, his. Elias sat alone, tray untouched, pretending to read while trying to ignore the laughter around him. Sometimes he imagined standing up, yelling, throwing the tray across the room. But he never did. He just swallowed the pain. Again. His only safe place was the library. In the far back corner near the dusty art books no one ever opened, Elias would sketch. With a cheap pencil and worn notebook, he drew the world as he saw it. Twisted, emotional, raw. Faces full of expression. People crying, laughing, breaking. He drew the bullies too, but not how they looked, how they felt. Behind Marcos's perfect smile, Elias drew fear. Behind the followers' smirks, he drew insecurity. And behind his own wide eyes, he drew quiet fire. But no one ever saw those drawings. They were his secret world. The only place where he wasn't weird, he was powerful. Until one day, someone did see. And everything began to change. It was a rainy Monday morning when the classroom door opened and someone new walked in. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Reyes. I'll be taking over this class for the rest of the semester." He was young, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes that scanned the room without judgment. His voice was calm, firm, but not cold. The kind of voice that made even the loudest kids sit up a little straighter. To most students, he was just another teacher. But for Elias, something felt different. Mr. Reyes didn't flinch when he looked at him, didn't glance away like others did. He looked him in the eye and smiled. During art period, a few days later, Mr. Reyes gave the class a simple assignment. Draw what freedom means to you. Most kids scribbled half-hearted drawings. Birds, open skies, skateboards. Elias hesitated. For a moment, he thought about staying invisible. But then, he opened his sketchbook. For the first time, he let something from his private world spill onto a class assignment. He drew a boy, hunched, surrounded by faceless shadows, pointing and laughing. But in the center of his chest, a light was breaking through, a small flame. When Mr. Reyes walked by and saw it, he paused. "Did you draw this?" he asked gently. Elias nodded, barely lifting his eyes. "This is powerful." Those 3 words struck Elias like lightning. Powerful. No one had ever used that word for anything he'd done. Most people didn't use any words at all. But Mr. Reyes saw something in him. Not pity, respect. From that day on, Mr. Reyes started paying attention. He'd ask Elias for his thoughts after class. Give him books about famous illustrators and expressionist painters. He even stayed late one afternoon, just to see Elias draw. "Have you ever thought of entering a contest?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "Well, maybe you should." A seed had been planted, not just of hope, but of possibility. For the first time, Elias began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his drawings weren't just a secret escape. Maybe they were a weapon, a voice, and he was getting ready to use it. While the rest of the school dismissed Elias as a nobody, a ghost walking the halls, he was building something in silence, something big. After Mr. Reyes encouraged him, Elias began working harder than ever. Every night, he stayed up late sketching, experimenting with colors, shadows, emotions. But this time, it wasn't just to escape. It was preparation. There was an upcoming regional art competition. Mr. Reyes had slipped the entry form into his locker with a simple note, "You have a voice, let them hear it." Elias stared at that note for hours. It scared him, the thought of putting his art, his soul in front of strangers, in front of his bullies. But fear was something he knew well, and he was tired of letting it win. He didn't tell anyone he was entering, not even Mr. Reyes. He wanted to do it on his own terms, quietly, secretly. He chose to tell his story through a single piece, a massive drawing full of movement and pain. He called it "The Boy Who Wasn't Seen." It showed a crowd of people laughing, shouting, pointing. Their faces were exaggerated, twisted, monstrous. In the center was a boy curled in on himself, not out of fear, but because he was turning into something else. His skin cracked open with light. From within, wings began to form. It took Elias 3 weeks. Dozens of drafts, ruined pencils, sleepless nights. He poured everything he had into it, every insult, every silent tear, every time he'd wanted to scream and hadn't. When he finally submitted it, he didn't expect anything. He didn't even plan to attend the award ceremony. But 2 days later, everything changed. The school principal came over the intercom during morning announcements. "We'd like to congratulate our student, Elias Rivera, who has just been selected as a finalist in the Regional Youth Art Competition. His piece will be showcased at the City Gallery this weekend." The classroom went silent. All eyes turned to the back of the room. To the boy they had called alien, freak, nothing. And for the first time they saw him. The school hallways weren't the same after the announcement. Whispers followed Elias wherever he went. But they weren't mocking anymore. They were curious, awkward, even admiring. Some students stared at him like they'd never seen him before. Others avoided eye contact, ashamed of the things they'd once said. But no one laughed, not even Marcos. The award ceremony at the City Gallery was packed. Parents, students, teachers, local artists, all gathered under glowing lights and clean white walls. Elias stood alone in a corner, nervously tugging at the sleeves of his only decent shirt. He hadn't told his parents. They were too busy, too distant. But Mr. Reyes was there, smiling proudly from the front row. When it was time to unveil the finalist pieces, the room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they stood before the boy who wasn't seen. People gasped. Some cried, because Elias hadn't just drawn, he had bled truth onto that canvas. Everyone who looked at it felt something: shame, guilt, hope, pain, beauty. And then came the moment no one expected. A judge walked up to the microphone. "This piece," she said, gesturing to Elias's work, "reminded us why art exists in the first place. To make us feel, to confront what we'd rather ignore, to speak when words fail. The first prize goes to Elias Rivera." For a moment, Elias didn't move. He thought maybe he'd imagined it. But then the crowd clapped. Harder, louder, rising to their feet. Elias walked to the stage, slowly, nervously, but with his head high. And when he looked out into the audience, he saw them. Marcos, his friends, his classmates, all standing, applauding, not because they were told to, but because they had no choice. Because in that moment, Elias wasn't the weird kid anymore. He was the artist, the voice they had ignored, now too loud and too brilliant to deny. Elias never said a word to Marcos. He didn't have to. The days that followed the competition were filled with awkward glances and forced smiles. The same students who once mocked him now stumbled over compliments. "Hey man, that drawing was a deep. Didn't know you were talented like that." But Elias wasn't interested in their sudden kindness. He hadn't drawn for praise. He had drawn to survive. And now that he had, their opinions didn't matter anymore. Marcos, though, he couldn't hide his frustration. He tried to joke, tried to act like he didn't care. "Guess freaks are popular now," he muttered once, passing Elias in the hall. But his voice lacked the bite it once had. His words fell flat, like a weapon rusted from disuse. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. In art class, Mr. Reyes posted a copy of Elias's winning piece on the wall. It stayed there for the rest of the year. Every day, students walked past it. Every day, Marcos had to see it. A reminder of the kid he once laughed at, who now stood above him without ever needing to raise his voice. The school even invited Elias to speak at an assembly. He almost said no. Public speaking terrified him. But he realized something. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about every quiet kid, every outsider who'd ever been told they were less than. So he stood on that stage, hands trembling slightly, and said, "They used to call me names. They thought I was strange. But what they never asked was why, or who I really was. I didn't fight back with fists or words. I just showed them what I see. And now they're finally looking." No dramatic music. No grand confrontation, just truth. And that was his revenge. Not loud, not cruel, just undeniable. The seasons changed, and so did everything else. Elias walked the halls with quiet confidence now. Not because people treated him differently, but because he saw himself differently. He no longer tried to shrink, no longer wished to disappear. He had found his voice, not in shouting, not in fighting, but in showing the world exactly who he was, through the art they once ignored. Marcos, once the king of the school, slowly faded. His jokes didn't land like they used to. His followers found other people to circle. And Elias? He didn't gloat, he didn't mock him back. He simply lived, freely, openly, and with a purpose. Mr. Reyes kept mentoring him, helping him apply to art schools and competitions. By the end of the year, Elias had been accepted into a prestigious visual arts program. The boy who once sat at the back of the classroom, invisible, was now the future of something beautiful. And even though he had changed, Elias never forgot where he came from, or what he went through. Years later, he would return to that same school, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. He stood before a new generation of kids, many of whom had been judged, labeled, or cast aside, just like he had. And he told them, "People will try to tell you who you are based on what they see, but you get to decide who you become." I was called weird, ugly, nothing, and I believed it for a while, until I realized the only thing wrong with me was that I believed them. Now I let my work speak for me, and it says everything they refuse to see. The auditorium went quiet, and then, slowly, it filled with applause. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the odd ones, the ones you think are broken, because often they're not weak, they're just waiting, watching, growing. And when their moment comes, it doesn't explode, it blooms. So the next time you feel tempted to judge someone by how they look, how they speak, or how they act, remember Elias. And remember this: don't judge a book by its cover, because some of the best stories are written in silence. What would you have done in Elias's place? Have you ever been judged unfairly? Tell us your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.